Welcome to the World War I podcast, produced by the MacArthur Memorial. I'm your host, Amanda Williams. Join me as we explore a wide range of interesting topics related to World War I. This podcast is sponsored by the Ernst and Gertrude Tico Charitable Foundation. Arthur MacArthur III is less well known than his younger brother, General Douglas MacArthur, and his father, the Civil War hero Arthur MacArthur Jr., but his career was also quite consequential and full. From the Spanish-American War to his untimely death in 1923, he distinguished himself as a very brave, resourceful, and energetic officer. Unlike his father and brother, however, he did not serve in the United States Army. Instead, he served in the United States Navy. And today we're going to discuss his World War I service, and we are joined by historian Jeff Acosta. Welcome, sir. Thank you for being here today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Amanda. And I like talking about Arthur MacArthur, the Navy's MacArthur, as I like to call him, because he's part of this dynamic family of the late 19th, early 20th century. And I think I have to agree with D. Clayton James, the biographer of Douglas MacArthur, biographer, who points out that at this period of history, the MacArthur family chose many fields. It just wasn't the military. They were lawyers. The grandfather was a federal judge, and that he thought Arthur was another one who went his own way but showed that a MacArthur could succeed in whatever field they put their mind to. And Arthur was born in Norfolk, Virginia, at the Hardy family home, River Edge, on the 1st of June, 1876. Now, during that time, there would be two more brothers. As you know, Malcolm was the second brother. And then, of course, there was Douglas, who was the baby of the family, for lack of a better term. And the family would frequently visit Norfolk. And I can only guess that maybe there was something in the water of Norfolk, Virginia, that's going to result in Arthur choosing to become a sailor, to join the United States Navy. We know that when the family was visiting here, the three boys got sick. I think it's like 1883-ish that time, and Malcolm dies. But you have this picture based on the writings of Douglas MacArthur, because Arthur doesn't leave a reminiscence behind. He doesn't leave a memoir. So everything we know about him growing up as the older brother, the big brother of Douglas, we get from Douglas. And the indication from Douglas MacArthur was they were brothers. They hung out together. They did things together. They lived what Douglas felt was a romanticized life out in New Mexico when their dad was stationed at Fort Selden. They were homeschooled until the late 1880s. They don't go to formal school till the late 1880s. And that's in Washington, D.C. And what happens is when they're in D.C., my interpretation is I think Mary could be overbearing. And she could pull Douglas close to her because he was the youngest. But I think Arthur pushed back a little. And what's going to happen is his grandfather, Judge Arthur MacArthur, is going to get young Arthur III an appointment to the United States Naval Academy at age 16. Now, some historians, I think his name is Kenneth Young, wrote, there was pushback from Mary. His mother did not want her son going to the Naval Academy at such a young age. Because today, if you're a midshipman at the U.S. Naval Academy, you are 19, 20 years old. Not then. They were taking him as young as 15. And so he goes, his father supports this, and his grandfather support this move. And so Arthur leaves the family early at age 16 to become a cadet. They didn't use the word midshipman yet, at the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. And he is going to, unlike his brother, he will have an average career at the U.S. Naval Academy. He's going to get demerits. When he finally graduates, he is right in the middle of his class. He's not at the top like his younger brother Douglas, is going to be superior at everything he does at West Point. It seems to me, reading the yearbooks from the period, when you see things, material about Arthur MacArthur at the Naval Academy, he, to me, was probably a little more laid back than his brother Douglas, a little less intense, going to have some good times, and was taking life easy. So he goes to the Naval Academy, and while he's there, he is going to come into contact with young midshipmen, or cadets as they called them, who are going, though, play a part in his brother Douglas's life. People like Joseph K. Taussig. Ernest King, is going to graduate behind Arthur, but they knew each other at the academy. William Pyle, William Leahy, another one would be Harry E. Yarnell, and Thomas Hart. Thomas Hart was commander of the Asiatic Fleet in December 1941 when World War II broke out, when Douglas MacArthur was the commander of U.S. Army Forces Far East. So there are Navy officers who Douglas is going to work with who knew his brother well. And he will graduate in those days. When you graduated from the Naval Academy, you were considered what's called a passed midshipman. You then had to go to sea for 2 years away from the Naval Academy. Once you were done, you came back to the Naval Academy. They looked at your record as a passed midshipman. You took another battery of exams, and then Congress would say, we need this many ensigns in this part of the Navy. And usually you had more midshipmen returning than you had billets in the U.S. Navy. And if you did not make the cut, Arthur did make the cut, but if you did not make the cut, you received an honorable discharge from the Navy, you got your diploma from the U.S. Naval Academy, but you were not commissioned. So this is the way it was for Arthur. This would all change as a result of the Spanish-American War. The Navy would put in new policies, and they had this process of go to the Naval Academy for 4 years, and then you have to do 2 years at sea before you qualify as an ensign in the U.S. Navy. Now, you have to understand, if Arthur was 16 when he arrived in 1892, he was basically, by the time he got done with his passed midshipman, if my math is correct, if he was 16, he was about 22 when he does get his commission, finally. And then the Spanish-American War breaks out. And Arthur has a habit, for lack of a better term, being at the right place at the right time and doing the right things. And he is at the largest battle of the Spanish-American War in Cuba, the Battle of Santiago of Cuba. He's on the USS Vixen. He acquits himself well. It's a small ship. It's a scout ship. I think Tommy Hart is one of the other midshipmen on the ship with him. And this gets Douglas all excited. Douglas doesn't want to go to West Point now. He wants to enlist like his dad did, as you know, and he wants to enlist in the Army like his dad, come up through the ranks, and he then hears about his brother down at Santiago de Cuba, and this even fires I don't want to go to West Point. I want to go to the Army right away. And this time, saner minds, I think Mary puts her foot down, say, no, this is not going to happen. And even his father says, no, you're going to go to West Point first. Then Arthur goes from there. We have the Philippine-American War. He is stationed on the USS Yorktown, and he is involved in maintaining the maritime blockade against the forces of the First Philippine Republic, Emilio Aguinaldo. And it's during this time, there's a letter in the archives here that Jim Zobel showed me, was a letter written to General Douglas MacArthur during World War II from a man who said, I was in the Philippines when your father was the military governor general, and I met you. And in Douglas MacArthur's handwriting on the margin, he says, that's not me, that's my brother.
Wow.
He met. So then the Boxer Rebellion breaks out. Well, the Yorktown gets sent up to China for the Boxer Rebellion. Now, while Arthur doesn't participate in combat operations ashore, one of the Navy ships, and I forgot which one, runs aground on a sandbar, and the Navy has to get it off the sandbar. And they send Arthur over to take charge of the team that eventually successfully refloats this ship. Then Arthur and his best friend at the Naval Academy, Dudley Knox, they meet the McCullough sisters. And they marry the McCullough sisters. So his best friend, they marry his sisters. Mm-hmm. I forgot what Dudley's wife's name was. I know that Mary McCullough MacArthur is the wife of Arthur. And I found the wedding announcement in the society page of the New York Times. And they talk about this marriage of, I think it was in Newport, of Arthur MacArthur and Mary McCullough. And best man was young Douglas MacArthur, detached from the Corps of Cadets at West Point. So Douglas is his brother's best man when his brother does get married. Then Arthur gets involved with the beginning of the submarine navy. Then they were submarine torpedo boats. These boats were really surface ships that could submerged for short periods of time. But Arthur trains, he gets sent out to Mare Island, California to commission the first 2 submarines of the Pacific Fleet, the Grampus and the Pike. And his father-in-law is his CO. And he does very well. And it's a lot of testing more than anything else. This is new technology. How's it going to work? And he does a good job. And then he gets command of a destroyer. Then he gets a series of commands, including running a ship aground, which is never good. The Navy frowns upon that. They don't like their ships being run aground, but it was quite common back then considering the navigational charts as they existed, and he's court-martialed. But what happens is the conviction is overturned, and he continues his Navy career. And as we're approaching World War I in 1916, he is in command of the armored cruiser South Dakota on the West Coast. And that is where he is when war is declared in April 1917 for World War I.
If I could backtrack for one moment, can you tell us a little bit about his father-in-law? Because I believe it's Douglas MacArthur's biographer, D. Clayton James, that has a really witty little sentence where he says that Arthur's marriage certainly didn't hurt his career.
No, it didn't. But the Navy is interesting. Arthur's going to I'm not kidding. I was doing the numbers. By the time Arthur dies, he has been in the Navy 38 years, and he has been at sea, and I'll find it to confirm it. He's been at sea 50% of his naval career. He is on ships. He is at sea. He is the classic case of sailors and Marines belong on ships. Ships belong on sea. And he obviously came home enough to have a lot of kids, unlike Douglas, right? Mm-hmm. But at the same time, he was part of this old Navy adage when it comes to spouses. If the Navy wanted you to have a wife, you would be issued one. A spouse is he has to deal with that. But it doesn't help, too, that he must have been a good sailor because it's just not his father-in-law who's watching him.
No, but it doesn't hurt. You're already very good at what you do. And then your father-in-law is probably somebody that everybody respects you because he's an admiral.
Yes, he becomes an admiral. But even to this day, in the Navy and the Marine Corps, it's your combat fitness reports that get really looked at come promotion time. And he had very good evaluations when he is fighting on the Vixen off Santiago de Cuba, when he is in the Philippines on the Yorktown, and when again he is on the Yorktown up at the Boxer Rebellion. So he's getting the checks and the marks that this is just not a sailor who's doing peacetime deployments. This is a very active sailor. And he does very well at his shore positions. Yes, it helps with his father, but I think he was impressing other admirals too. And now Bowman McCullough is one of the more colorful sailors of this period. I mean, this was a man who felt that if a sailor stepped out of line and he punched him, that was okay to do because he was the captain of the ship. He got into trouble. He almost had his career derailed for being hands-on with many members of the crew. But he comes to fame because he's the one that locates where Guantanamo Bay is. During the same battle where Arthur is on the Vixen off Santiago on blockade duty, to refuel the ships, the Navy had to go all the way back to Key West. And Admiral Sampson wanted someplace closer. He sends Bowman on a scouting mission, and it's Bowman who locates Guantanamo Bay and said, this is where we should put our base to support our operations against the Spaniards in Cuba. And so that's Bowman McCullough. And then Bowman, again, is very much involved in the Boxer Rebellion. So, yeah, there's no doubt this relationship with his father-in-law, does work. But he would have to prove it at sea. And you look at his record, it's quite admirable at sea, except for this one grounding of a ship, which wasn't uncommon. Even Admiral Nimitz ran one of his ships aground. Mm-hmm. So, because the charts were just not always up to snuff or up to the best back then.
All right, so I think a lot of people are familiar with how the U.S. Army mobilizes once the United States enters the war in 1917, but how does the Navy respond?
Well, first, you have to understand 1916. And Woodrow Wilson is running for president. His campaign message is, I'm going to keep you out of the war. I kept our boys out of the war in Europe. And he gives orders to the Army and the Navy that they cannot begin planning any operations that would involve the United States fighting in Europe. So for the Navy, they're kind of like watching the war in Europe. They're watching the Battle of Jutland, but they're getting the wrong lessons. They're thinking battleships, battleships, battleships. And what they're not preparing for is the U-boat. That is what the Navy's not preparing for. And the chief of naval operations at the time, a man by the name of Benson, was very hostile towards the British. He didn't like them. So Arthur, by this time, is a commander, what today would be an 05. He's got command of the South Dakota out on the West Coast. I have no doubt in my mind he's watching what's happening in Europe. But understand that the Navy's hands are tied, much like the Army's, and they can do no preparation during the campaign season, during the election, indicating that the U.S. is on the verge of entering the war in Europe. Now, what is going to happen is in Germany, the Kaiser, Ludendorff, and I'm trying to remember the other, Erich von Ludendorff, and bottom line is German High Command makes a determination that they have to end the war. It's a war of attrition. They come up with the plan. Basically, they're going to take Russia out of the war first, shift 1 million German soldiers to France, then take the French out. But to do that, they got to declare they have to go unrestricted submarine warfare. And after the Lusitania, Wilson had warned the Germans that if they conduct unrestricted submarine warfare against flags other than those of the belligerents, that would be casus belli. U.S. would go to war with Germany. And Germany says, we'll take the risk. We're going to have to stop all supplies, a maritime blockade, using U-boat submarines, separating the United States economically in terms of supplies from Great Britain and France. And when he does that, when the Germans announce the resumption of unrestricted submarine warfare in January 1917, Wilson has no choice but to recall the United States ambassador. And then you have the Zimmermann telegram, and then it's quickly followed by the First Russian Revolution. All these events allow Wilson to go to the Congress in April 1917 and request a declaration of war, which he gets. So that's pretty much now mobilization. Once that declaration of war goes into effect, Admiral Sims is sent to England, and he finds out the U-boats are damaging the ability of Great Britain to feed its population. They're not getting enough food from the U.S. And that Britain and France are starting to teeter on the verge of collapse. And the British have an idea, because remember, you don't have sonar yet. You don't have radar yet. The way you found a U-boat is you caught it on the surface. The British had just invented depth charges. And the one way that you found a U-boat, the basic tactic was, if the U-boat fired a torpedo, it had to get close to its target for the technology of the period, within 500 yards. It left a trail of bubbles. So the British destroyer, the French destroyer would follow the trail of bubbles back to their origin and drop depth charges. But they had no idea kind of what the depth was of the U-boat. But the key was to keep the U-boat down until it ran out of oxygen or its intended targets sailed away to safety. So when Sims arrives, the Royal Navy says, we don't need your battleships. We want you to build more destroyers. We need convoy escorts. So this whole idea, we're going to move ships in convoys, supply ships mainly. And you put this group of 12 to 15 to 20 ships together, merchant ships. They're loaded up with food, raw materials for the war effort. They can only sail, they're pretty slow. They only sail at about 13 knots. You only went as fast as your slowest ship. And so you would surround it with escorts. And the idea was you bring the U-boat to the convoy. And when the minute they fire that first torpedo, the escorts pounce on it, keep it down, and then the convoy leader will take the convoy fast as possible in another direction. Now you have to understand, U-boats underwater could only do about 9 knots tops. They're very slow underwater. So the whole plan was really to avoid the U-boats, to keep the U-boats down, not necessarily sink them, again, because you don't have the technology yet. You don't have radar. As a matter of fact, while Arthur MacArthur is in command of Chattanooga, they get what's called the diving bell, and I haven't figured out how this device works. But they're starting to understand that sound moves differently underwater. So the United States and the British are developing technologies that will allow them to listen underwater, for listening to those distinct mechanical sounds of a U-boat. But it's very nascent. It's in its first stages. It's not what you're going to see if you watch any films about World War II, or you watch Victory at Sea, and you see the Americans and the British using both radar, sonar, and aircraft to keep the U-boats down. That doesn't exist yet. So a lot of it is good judgment by the commander and good technology. So what comes out of this, Benson is forced to have to say, okay, we're going to build more destroyers. But by the time the destroyers get built, it's going to be 1919. So what do you do in the intervening 2 years? The Navy started commissioning anything that floated. If it floated, it was going to become a convoy escort. And they also signed an agreement, the United States, with Japan that will allow us to shift the Pacific, a large part of the Pacific Fleet, to the Atlantic to become convoy escorts. So that's what happens to Arthur MacArthur. He is commanding the armored cruiser Seattle up in, South Dakota, up in the Bremerton, Washington area. And then he gets orders to USS Chattanooga, which is a light cruiser at Mare Island. And when he arrives at Mare Island, he only has about 10% of a crew. And now he's going to get all these raw recruits, fresh out of Navy boot camp, officers who have not spent a great deal of time at sea, and he's got to get them ready to go to war. And like the Navy is saying, why didn't you do this yesterday? But that's because Wilson wouldn't let the Navy properly prepare. Or the Army, by the way. Douglas MacArthur is going through the same problem as he's building up the 42nd Rainbow Division. So both services are going through this problem. But it really goes back to 1916.
You mentioned that Arthur is in the Pacific when the war actually starts for the United States.
Yes.
Now, kind of walk us through how he gets to the Atlantic, and then what does his wartime service look like?
Okay. Basically, he gets to Mare Island. They have taken the crew from the Chattanooga and put it on the crew, the sister ship, an exact sister ship, the Denver. He's got to build the new crew for the Chattanooga. He knows he's going to be heading he's got orders to proceed towards the Panama Canal, which he knows right away means he's heading into the Atlantic. So along the way, one of the things that I've located at the National Archives was one of the few documents that gives you an idea of who Arthur MacArthur is. And that is the battle diary for the USS Chattanooga with Arthur maintained. And so he picks up his crew. He does as much training as he can. They then get orders to proceed to San Diego, then from San Diego through the Panama Canal, and then report to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. He, on the way down from San Diego to the Panama Canal, he is ordered to look for a German radio station that may be reporting on movements of the American fleet in the Pacific located in present-day El Salvador. Now, when Arthur steams in, he sends his executive officer ashore. The young man spends a couple of days ashore and then comes back and tells then Commander MacArthur, look, sir, there's no radio station. It was there, but it's gone now. Fine, let's go. We got to go to Panama. They get to Panama. They go through the canal. They go to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. There, the Chattanooga is going to sit pretty much doing, for lack of a better term, protecting the Gulf of Mexico from U-boats. Now, let's explain something. The Germans are only going to build about 10 U-boats that had the ability to go from Germany to the east coast of the U.S., even reach the Gulf of Mexico. But what the Chattanooga is doing is showing the flag. She's involved in moving Marines to Haiti to make sure that the Haitian government stays under U.S. control. That's a whole separate program. But showing the flag in around Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Okay. Well, while he's at Cuba, he gets a letter through the Department of State where he is chastised by the U.S. Consul in El Salvador because he didn't show proper respect to the government of El Salvador or to the U.S. Diplomatic Corps, pronouncing his presence. And his response is classic MacArthur. It's basically, I'm fighting a war. You're sitting on your butts in El Salvador. You don't tell a MacArthur I know what my duty is. Okay? I'm doing my job. And by the way, I work for the U.S. Navy, not for El Salvador, not for the Department of State. Nobody says a word. It's wartime. Eventually, what is going to happen is he is going to be sent later. And as I look now, I'm looking at the diary of the ship, and he is going to, in July of 1917, Chattanooga gets orders to proceed to Norfolk, Virginia. When he arrives in Norfolk, he is told, okay, you are going to be going on convoy duty. And the way this is going to work is you will be escorting convoys of raw materials, things like iron ore, wheat, barley, food, raw materials needed to fight the war in Europe. You will start in New York City. You will pick up your convoy in New York City. You will go 2/3 of the way across the Atlantic. Now, this is the extreme range of the average U-boat. So once Chattanooga got 2/3 of the way across the Atlantic, it would rendezvous with another group of French, British, or American escorts coming out of Great Britain or coming out of France. They would pick up the convoy being escorted by the Chattanooga, take it the rest of the way into Europe. Meanwhile, Chattanooga will turn around. They'll do a high-speed run to Norfolk, Virginia. When they arrive in Norfolk, Arthur is going to lose about 25% of his crew that he's just trained to go serve on the battleships and the new ships of the Navy. He's got to rapidly train his crew again, then go back up to New York City and pick up his next convoy. And this is the pattern. Mm-hmm. Okay. But understand what he's doing. He is shepherding anywhere from 13 to 15 to 20 ships with new escorts. And this is in the days before radar. And this is being done by strict navigation. And so he must have been a brilliant navigator to keep this organization together. He's using the tools of the period. For example, one of the things is as the sun set, they would drop a light off the stern of each ship. It's a red light that can only be seen at the ship directly behind. And what this did was it allows everybody to keep an interval of about 200 to 300 yards between ships. And that's how it works. And Arthur's got the Chattanooga out front. She's out front. Now, the reason they want cruisers is in the case the Navy feared, and so did the Royal Navy, that the Germans may get a bunch of surface raiders. They're going to break out of the North Sea and begin attacking the convoy. So you needed a ship that was big enough to deal with a German surface raider if one showed up. And that was the job of the Chattanooga. She had 5-inch guns. She was cold-fired. She was twin-screwed. But she was built for duty in the Caribbean and the Philippines. She was not built for the North Atlantic. And as a result, but like I said, the Navy, if it floated, they needed it. And so she's doing this the route, this rhythm, as I told you, this battle rhythm of the ship. Well, one of the times he comes back from one of his convoys, and he gets orders to send 12 sailors from his ship to the brand new flagship of the Atlantic Fleet, USS Pennsylvania. So he sends 12 sailors. Now, unlike the Army, if you were in the Navy during World War I, you were not in for the duration, as you hear happens during World War II. If you were in the Navy during World War, you served your enlistment. So if you were in for 4 years, you're in for 4 years. And what he does, he sends all of his short-timer sailors over to the Pennsylvania. So he goes on his convoy run. He comes back to Norfolk, and there's a letter from the captain of the Pennsylvania to the admiral, the chief of, all the way through the Navy chain of command to the Chattanooga. Basically, the captain of the Pennsylvania complaining, you sent me 12 guys, 12 sailors, and they all are out of the Navy now because they were all short enlistment. They were at the end of their enlistment. And Arthur's response, again, typical MacArthur, look, I'm fighting the war, and you're sitting here in Norfolk turning the hook out in Hampton Roads. Well, I'm really fighting the war. You're not really fighting the war in the Pennsylvania. I'm fighting the war. And you asked for 12 sailors. I sent you 12 sailors. Next time, if you want them with longer enlistments, put that in your request. Be specific. Otherwise, you got what you asked for. And he continues. So Arthur is colorful. He is going to lead 7 convoys. There'll be only one major incident. You have to understand how the troop transports moved. Troops were moved on ocean liners, either former German, British, or American ocean liners. And the theory was, since U-boats were slow, the ocean liners could go 25 plus knots. So they would just pack them full of troops and send them across the Atlantic as fast as possible. And hopefully they were going to avoid the U-boats, which they did. The only troop transports that were sunk were on their way back to the United States. They were empty. By U-boats, they caught them outside of France. So as a result, you have 2 different ways of systems. You got one set of ships to move troops. Those were your fastest. But Arthur's involved in convoy duty. Now, Douglas one for hyperbole, we would argue, during reminiscences, talks about how, I forgot what it was, he is looking out from...
I've got the quote.
What's the quote?
So he's traveling across the Atlantic to France with the 42nd, and he says, "It was nerve-wracking, but I felt a glow in my heart knowing that the Chattanooga, commanded by my brother," and he promotes him, I guess Captain Arthur MacArthur, although he is the captain of the ship, "was out there in the escort watching over us." True
Wrong.
or false?
False. Totally false. The ship that was responsible for that escort was the armored cruiser Seattle. Arthur was just returning to Norfolk on that date. He had just taken his second convoy across. That was convoy number HN11, and he was just returning to Norfolk when his brother was leaving Hoboken. So, false.
False. Arthur is a recipient of the Navy Cross and the Navy's Distinguished Service Medal. Can you tell us about the circumstances?
I can only talk to the Navy Cross, not to the Distinguished Service Medal. The Navy Cross was given to almost every officer involved in convoy duty who successfully got convoys across the Atlantic. So, for example, Admiral Bull Halsey of World War II was also an escort commander. He had a destroyer escorting these convoys. He got a Navy Cross for this duty. So it is an award. And look, he did what he did. He got 7 convoys across. He did not lose a single ship. The worst thing that happened wasn't the convoys. There was a collision. One of those fast-moving ocean liners was returning from France. Remember, no radar, dark at night. It goes right through Arthur's convoy and hits one of the merchant ships. He has to turn around, spin around the Chattanooga to go see what happened. Luckily, the damage was minimal, but his ship, those long lines with those lights, took one of those lines and sucked it into his propeller and destroyed one of his propeller shafts. Well, everything got squared away. The convoy continued on its own to its rendezvous successfully, but then he had to limp on one engine, one screw, back to the United States. Now, eventually, the ship will get sent to Charleston Navy Yard to be fully repaired. And that's where they get their anti-submarine bell. And again, I can't find much information on what exactly is an anti-submarine bell. I do know, based on histories that have been written about U.S. Navy and Royal Navy anti-submarine warfare capabilities for World War I, a bell was some sort of sound device. It was for listening for the U-boats. So Chattanooga got one. She also had depth charge racks, by the way. She could drop depth charges if need be.
Now, I think it's very interesting because sometimes we get people here at the museum, and I think sometimes the perception is convoy duty must have been very boring or very easy, but I think you make it really clear that, I mean, Arthur and the other convoy leaders had to be exceptional at what they were doing. I mean, it's logistics, it's everything, or it doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
And there's a threat.
And you have the weather. Don't forget, he's got 2 enemies. Mm-hmm. He's got to deal with the U-boat, a possible German surface raider, but he's dealing with the weather. Imagine those of us who are here and have sailed on ships out of Norfolk in January can tell you the Atlantic Ocean is nobody's friend. I mean, it'll even knock around a supercarrier, okay? Imagine these ships, which are only the 10th to 1/4 of the tonnage of an aircraft carrier today, and they're getting bounced around too. But he's got to maintain this convoy, and there's no radar. So he has got to be constantly on his toes, making sure that the ships maintain convoy discipline. His officers are always up and working. Half the crew, if they're not manning the guns and sleeping, they are on watch with binoculars all over the ship, looking for the U-boats or making sure that the ships in the convoy maintain their intervals of discipline until he turns it over to the escort that he was going to rendezvous with on the other side of the Atlantic. And by the way, just so you know, the reason Chattanooga and the ships didn't go all the way to Great Britain was coal issues, the coal shortage. So Chattanooga would have to go back to that's why she went back to Norfolk, to reprovision. She didn't go to the other side because they just had enough coal to maintain the convoy escorts operating out of France or operating out of Great Britain.
So Douglas MacArthur's biographers tend to accept that Arthur's career was just on an excellent trajectory before his untimely death due to appendicitis in 1923. They've even suggested that he might have become Chief of Naval Operations. What do you think?
I don't think, look, when you get to that level of command, I don't care what branch of the armed forces, you're in what we call now peer review. There's an old saying in the military: you can fool your superiors, you can fool your subordinates, but you can't fool your peers. They know you. And now we're getting to a level where many of the men that Arthur had served with, gone to the Naval Academy with, they're on the verge of achieving flag rank. And he is known. There's no doubt he's known. He's known in the Navy. Would he have become Chief of Naval Operations? It's hard to say, because that is so political. What I think is correct is, yes, he would have become an admiral. No doubt in my mind. He would have achieved flag rank. But he was missing command in one type of ship that up-and-coming admirals needed in the 1920s. That's command of a battleship. He never has command of a battleship. He serves on them, but he never has command of them. His last command is the USS Henderson, which is fascinating in its own right. The Henderson was a transport that was used to move sailors and Marines from Quantico, Virginia, to stations in the Far East, Shanghai, Manila, the Philippines. So it was used, think of it like a bus. It's picking sailors and Marines who are on their way home and dropping off replacements in the Far East. I found out about that writing to a series of correspondence I did as the curator here with Ambassador Douglas MacArthur, who was the son of Arthur and was named after his famous uncle, Douglas. And he remembers taking a trip with his dad on the Henderson out to the Far East. He took the boys with him. He also remembered the Chattanooga. The other thing that I have no evidence of, but it couldn't have happened, remember, when he arrives in New York to begin his convoy service in June 1917, Douglas is training the 42nd Division out in Long Island. So I found it unfathomable that the brothers didn't get together during the summer of 1917 when Chattanooga's in New York. But also, this duty on the Henderson's fascinating because he's command of the Henderson when she's going to be used as the observation ship, when Billy Mitchell is going to bomb the Ostfriedland in Chesapeake Bay, and you had this whole fight between the Army and the Navy over can airplanes sink battleships. Well, Arthur commands the ship where all of the observers are, the Henderson. And that's his last seagoing command. And then he passes away, his appendix ruptures, and he dies of sepsis. And the letter I got from Douglas MacArthur, and another one I think from Bowman, because I asked him where was their father's class ring. And in the tradition of many West Pointers and Annapolis grads, when their father died, the class ring went back to Annapolis. So my next question was, where was their grandfather's Medal of Honor? They said that was in Manila with Douglas. Douglas got all the materials from their grandfather, and it all disappeared during World War II.
Right.
During that period. So, yeah, they had things, but they were very happy that somebody remembered him and were writing, took an interest in their dad. As a matter of fact, the reason I got access to all of Arthur MacArthur's military records, which are now here in a record group at the MacArthur Memorial, was, as you know, the National Archives, if you have next of kin who is still alive, and that is anybody that's a spouse, a mother, father, son, or daughter, you got to get their permission to release the military records before they go into the public. Military records will not go into the public domain until all the next of kin have deceased. So one of the challenges back in the 90s working at the MacArthur Memorial was if I wanted Douglas MacArthur's records, I had to get Gene MacArthur to sign off on it. And if I needed Arthur MacArthur's records, I had to get his surviving sons to sign off on it. And luckily, everybody was very cooperative. Mm-hmm. And so we were able to get all their military records, which helped us. But again, going to the National Archives and finding that battle diary of the USS Chattanooga, that was a find. And that documents those that first year the Chattanooga is doing convoy duty.
And in a few moments, once we're finished with this podcast, you and I are going to go look at a new collection the MacArthur Memorial just received of McCullough family stuff related to Arthur and his father-in-law. And so it's for historians, it's like continuing Christmas every day.
Well, here's the thing. You and I know that Dudley Knox, his best friend at the Naval Academy. They marry the McCullough sisters. I sent you this historical sketch, and this was put together by Dudley Knox, who was at that time the officer in charge of the Naval History Section, or today what we would call the Naval History and Heritage Center. And so I could see this letter arriving, and Dudley, you can see with the detail that this is kind of I'm going to honor my brother-in-law here. And this is 1 year after Arthur had passed away.
Right.
So I could see why Dudley Knox went into such detail for a simple letter that was about, can you tell me about the Chattanooga?
Right.
This was...
It's a little bit of a novel. It's
yes.
wonderful for a historian.
And this was my first lead to where to go look at the National Archives to find other records, including signals that were sent to the Chattanooga, how to organize the convoys, etc. So I have even more detail. I mean, the one thing, thanks to starting with Dudley Knox's letter, I got to drill down. And that's where you can find out some of the differences of what was happening with the 42nd. But you talked about preparation to get into World War I. We have very detailed records from Douglas MacArthur and of the 42nd Division. And now we can see the same thing. And you see that each service is wrestling with rapid mobilization because of orders given by President Wilson in 1916, don't get ready for war. I don't want word getting out that I'm thinking of taking us to war. Mm-hmm. So the Navy and the Army, they're both not prepared. They both are scrambling to get ready to fight this war in the Atlantic.
And they're both lucky to have such intelligent, capable, energetic officers.
Yes.
And not everybody, but, particularly maybe the MacArthur brothers.
Yeah. And by the way, the other thing I learned, and now I don't know if Jim's gone up there, but I didn't realize that the records of Douglas MacArthur and Arthur as students at Annapolis or West Point, those are separate records. And so if you want to see how they did at Annapolis or West Point, you have to go visit Annapolis or West Point and have them pull their records, their academic records. And that's where I found out Arthur was C's get degrees type of guy, Unlike Douglas, who's, I got to have an A. Arthur is more, a C. Gets me my commission. I'm good to go.
Any final thoughts?
No, I really think it's important. I do agree with D. Clayton James. I think Arthur MacArthur was an influence on his younger brother. He was a pace setter for his younger brother. And I think they got along. I just wish we could find more letters between the brothers. Yeah. And that's what's missing,
Yes, I agree.
Because they're both young men and they're in the middle of this global conflict. Mm-hmm. And they are MacArthurs after all. So I know they have opinions.
Oh, yes. Yes.
They're right. Everybody else is wrong. So what do you think of D. Clayton James? I believe he's the one that says that he thinks Arthur chose the Navy because he must have been on one of those marches with the family out west from one, fort to the next, and that he must have been just absolutely over the Army and having to walk or ride somewhere. I don't think so. I go with, I think his name is Kenneth Young, wrote a biography of Arthur MacArthur, their dad, their father, called The General's General. Mm-hmm. I think no. I think an opportunity came when they were in D.C. And I would argue, my opinion, it's like a nose. Everybody has one. Arthur wanted to get away from mom. That's my opinion. And Dad agreed with him. And I think Arthur understood there was a difference in his two sons. And he saw this opportunity to go to Annapolis as an opportunity for his oldest son. Because if father was really locked in, he would have said, no, you're going to West Point. But he doesn't. Right. When this opportunity arises, based on what we have, Arthur encourages his son, go to Annapolis, go to the Navy.
And the family seems very tight-knit. I mean, both of Arthur MacArthur Jr.'s sons admire their father.
Yes.
So obviously the relationship was really good between all of them.
It was. And not only that, if you read reminiscences, it's very poignant what Douglas writes when he hears of the death of his brother. And he said, I think the word is, it's a simple one sentence too. It is a gap that isn't filled. So that indicates he missed his brother. He really cared about his brother. So,
absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Jeff. That was great.
Anytime.
We hope you enjoyed that episode. If you have questions, comments, or topic suggestions, the MacArthur Memorial team wants to hear from you. You can reach us at macarthurmemorial@norfolk.gov or find us on X at MacArthur1880 or on Facebook and Instagram as MacArthur Memorial.